Nofret. "Your name in the two lands is Nofret," said Seni, smiling a broad white crocodile's smile. "Every other name that you have had, forget. It means nothing here." "Someday," said the tribute offering called Nofret, "I shall be the chief of the Queen's servants. Then I can call myself whatever I please." "You will call yourself whatever your royal majesties please," said Seni with awful mildness. "Now, Kawit, tell us, what is it that a servant does before the face of the Queen?" Nofret left bland, milk-faced Kawit to Seni's tender mercies and went back to watching the processions. The Nubians had gone away, leaving the king's people to contend with the leopard. Now the king received an embassy from Nofret's own country. There was no mistaking those tall, full-fleshed men with their splendid arched noses and their hair falling long and thick from clean-shaved foreheads and clean-shaved faces. They were paler than people in Egypt, taller in the main, and much broader and thicker set. She blinked hard. Her head wanted to bow to her knees, her face to hide itself, but she stayed where she was, with her chin defiantly lifted. Only the shape of the faces and the fashion of clothes and hair were familiar. None of them was a man she knew. And well enough for her that they were strangers. She was long gone from great Hatti, and all her honor was dead. That had died the day she went hunting by herself because her brothers refused to be encumbered with a girl, and met a raiding party from Mitanni. They had been looking for whatever prey was most convenient. A fierce-tongued girl-child with an unstrung bow, tracking a deer from covert to covert, was worth a few scratches and some screeching, though the man she had stabbed with his own dagger had not been greatly happy. The others might have held out for a ransom, since the quality of her clothes and her ornaments made it clear enough that she was a lord's child, daughter of a commander of 1,000, if anyone had asked, which no one did. But the man she had stabbed was feeling vindictive. The wound was not deadly, but it was deep, and it was bloody, and it pained him considerably. He argued that she should be sold for the best price she could fetch. The others gave in after a while, bound and gagged her, and carried her away to Mitanni. She fetched a decent price in the slave market, bought by a lord whose senior wife needed a maid to fetch and carry for her. Nofret was not the prettiest of children, but she was tall for her age and strong, what with an indulgent father and a tribe of brothers, and more freedom to run wild in the woods than might have been regarded as proper for a Hittite lady. She had decided well before she was set up naked and furious on the block that she would make the best of what the gods had done to her. Mostly it was anger at herself and at the gods, because she had been hunting too far from home, and she had known it, as she had known that there were raiders on the border of Mitanni. It was shame, too, and stubbornness. She did not want her father or her brothers to know how foolish she had been. If they thought her dead, so be it. Better dead than a slave. Better even a slave than prey to her brother's mockery and her father's wrath. Once, the night after she was taken, she had tried to kill herself. She had gone for a dagger again, but this time her captors were ready for her. They laughed as they tied her more securely and set a guard on her. Their laughter did a strange thing. It drove her anger deep inside her, and turned it cold. She would live, she swore then. She would live and prosper and be altogether a new thing. Her name in Great Hatti was forgotten. She would not speak it then or ever. Let them call her what they pleased, which mostly was you there, or Hittite bitch, or something uncomplimentary in gutter Mitanni. None of them mattered. None of them touched or changed her. Her new mistress was easy enough to wait on, once she learned how to do it. It was crashingly dull being a maid to a lady in Mitanni. The only distraction was the son of the house, the darling of his mother's eye, a plump and pretty youth possessed of the conviction that he was irresistible to anything female. Nofret found him wonderfully easy to resist. She had been an innocent, and no mistake. She thought that a clear and often repeated no ought to be enough. But a slave, his young lordship made clear to her, was not allowed to say no. He let her live, in the end, chiefly because he was afraid of his mother's tears and reproaches. His mother was very soft-hearted. She hated to see anything die, even a slave. The greater wonder was that he let her live unmaimed after what she had done and said to him. He had enough wits left, and enough low cunning, to realize that he could rid himself of her the more quickly if he let her keep her ears and her nose and her breasts. She smiled to herself, thinking of him, how he had flung her at his father's steward and bidden the man send her with the rest of the king's tribute train to Egypt. His voice had broken like a boy's. Astonishing how excellent an education it was to grow up a girl in a house full of boys. One learned just what to say, and just where and when to sink one's teeth. Her smile alarmed the delicate flower of Mitanni, who crouched next to her, and made the child snivel. Nofret sighed. Women in great haughty were nothing like these feeble creatures. They kept their heads up. They walked with pride, even when they were slaves. The Hittites had gone past without ever noticing the lone Hittite in the knot of slaves from Mitanni. One of the many officials who kept the processions moving was striding toward them. His wig was askew, bearing his shaven skull. It looked as if he had thrust it aside absent-mindedly. He looked only mildly ridiculous. Men in Egypt, Nofret had been noticing, were not ill to look at for foreigners. One could even become accustomed to men as slender as boys, and brown, smooth bodies. The king's minister was much too busy to think any such thoughts of her, even if he had noticed her. "Come in your ranks," he said brusquely. "Seni, when you've presented this lot, Lady Kia bids you attend her." Seni, who despite her Egyptian name was as much of Mitanni as any of these children except Nofret, inclined her head. The steward had turned away already, intent on the party behind them. Seni took them briskly in hand, lined them up according to age and size and prettiness, which left Nofret well in the back, since she was tall and leggy like a wild filly foal, and marched them forth like an army into battle. Nofret had heard about battles. There was a great deal of waiting about in the hot sun, and very little actual fighting. Seni's ordering of the ranks had removed Nofret from her shadow, which was a nuisance. Nofret envied the princelings with their canopies or their parasols, and the king in his great golden pavilion. Such amenities were not given to slaves. They had to brave the naked sun and stand in it until they were given leave to advance. "The sun is his god," said one of the girls near Nofret. She was a dreamer. She should have been a priestess, but her family thought itself better served to send her to the Egyptian king. He was a dreamer himself, people said, when they did not say outright that he was mad. "He worships the sun," the dreamer murmured. "He sets no other gods before it. Oh, they are angry, the myriad gods of Egypt." "Hush," said the girl on the other side of her from Nofret. "She will hear you." They all, even Nofret, glanced warily at Seni. The woman was preoccupied with keeping her troops in order. The youngest and smallest were inclined to straggle if they were bold, and to whimper if they were not. Nofret did not intend to do either. There was too much to see. The whole world was here, come to pay homage to the king of Egypt, Amenophis, who had changed his name to Akhenaten for the glory of his god. He had been king a dozen years already, but in the two lands of Egypt they often had two kings, an old one and a young one, 2 courts and 2 palaces, even, in this age of the world, 2 cities from which to rule. Now the old king was dead, and Akhenaten ruled alone, he and his queen whose beauty was sung even in great Hatti. This was the festival of his ascent to sole kingship. It was both coronation and feast of renewal, both declaration of the new reign and affirmation that he was king, and had been king since the days of his youth. All these crowding armies of people, lords of the 2 lands and princes and ambassadors from the wide world, were here in the honor of his name. From Libya to Nubia to Asia, west to south to east to north, everyone knew who was king over kings, who was both ruler and god. Nofret had never seen so many people together, or so much gold in a single place. Everywhere she looked, it dazzled her, and there in front of her, where the king was nothing but gold. She wondered briefly if he swam in it when he was in his palace, just because he